Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the HyperNest Podcast. During this chat, we discuss with DeFi builders, incredible ecosystem, and everything that is exciting in this fantastic, marvelous Web3 world. Today, I have the great pleasure to have this chat with Eric Kang, that is the head of DeFi of Avalanche, and we're going to go through the most interesting innovation in the Avalanche ecosystem, a lot of DeFi news, and also additional interesting news in this beautiful Avalanche ecosystem. But before we go into it, I would like to ask Eric to introduce himself and tell him how he started to work together with Avalanche and how he entered also in the magical world of DeFi.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Alessio. So these days I am on the business development team for AvaLabs, which is the primary service provider behind the Avalanche blockchain. How I got to Avalanche was kind of random. I was working in traditional finance. I was in management consulting for a number of years, mostly doing M&A consulting for private equity and corporates. And funny enough, like some of my clients back in the day, right? They're like dipping their toes into blockchain now. Like Apollo was one of my big clients. And nowadays they're doing a bunch of stuff on the digital asset side of things. So it's funny how these things like come back around, in the ways you least expect it. But anyways, I joined AvaLabs back in 2020. I was thinking, at that time I didn't know what sort of startup or even industry of startups, right, I wanted to join. And I have been a crypto investor since 2017. So I had some familiarity with the industry, but not as deep, obviously, as I do now. And I would say back then when I was trying to make a decision, right, AvaLabs, what drew me to AvaLabs is a couple of things. One, the quality of the team, looking at Goon, Ted, Kevin's backgrounds, as well as John Woo, Lydia. It was an impressive team, right? And that's the biggest indication. Back then it was like a 30-person company, so you have to go off of that, right? As the main thing. And then, but not only that, the network also seemed to have strong technical acumen on the engineering side. It was honestly a great opportunity looking back at it. I was joined as essentially the second hire on the BD side. This was like 5 years ago, right? We've grown quite a bit since then. And when I first joined, I was very much a generalist. The network, I joined on a Monday. The network went live on a Thursday. We had a TG on that Thursday as well. So you kind of just do whatever you need to do, right, to get a new blockchain up and running. The typical exchange listings, wallet integrations, getting custody providers, talking to as many builders as possible, right? We had a first big come up for the chain, I would say February of next year, so February 2021. That was when some of the first dApps got launched. I don't know if some of the OGs might remember, right? We had maybe 12 AMMs, DEXs. People always say Penguin came first, but there was actually one that came before that called Zero Exchange. That's for the real OGs, I would say. But then we had Avalanche Rush and everything, and I would say the rest is almost history. But these days, as you alluded to, I focus primarily on the DeFi ecosystem. We're still a small BD team. I think we got maybe 15 people on the core team. But so we all wear multiple hats. Sometimes I dip my toes into RWAs, payments, even help out the gaming team, consumer team sometimes. So happy to dive into any of those things on this podcast. So, but yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Fantastic. I didn't know you were a real historian of Avalanche. So you have been part of all the evolution of the chain, basically.
Yeah, most of them. Some I wish I wasn't part of, but you gotta have your you gotta have the low points or the highs, right?
Well, that's it's a roller coaster, right? In particular in this industry, the bull market are very bull, the bear market are very cold, and as you've been in the space since 2017, the same as me, you have seen already quite a few peak, and it comes with it, right? All right, let's go to the first topic. I think the crazy and the most, in my opinion, one of the most interesting innovation on Avalanche is the Avalanche L1 chains, right? So they provide to these builders an incredible toolbox ready for innovation. I would like to learn a little bit more from your perspective about these Avalanche L1 chains.
Yeah. So that was, I think that was one of the primary innovations of Avalanche. From the very beginning, there was this concept that Avalanche would be a blockchain of blockchains. And for us, it's really important as not just from a BD perspective, right? But when we're talking to partners, having that optionality to, if you wanted to just launch an application and you want to test things, you can launch that on the C chain, which is a public permissionless blockchain. Anyone can. It's permissionless deployment of smart contracts. You can join as a validator and validate the network permissionlessly. I think we have like anywhere from 1,300 to 1,500 validators at any given point in time. And then on the flip side, right, you can launch your own custom blockchain as well. Most projects start off by launching permission blockchains with permission validator sets. And that's just more for control, right? For control, you don't have to, pay for security as much, and you can experiment as well, right? Launch with 10 validators, test out how the chain will function, make tweaks as you go before going to production fully. And then, but on the flip side, you can also launch permissionless chains, right? So even you can launch essentially a copy of the C chain if you wanted to, or a SVM chain like Solana. So from our perspective, it's an important tool for builders. We want to give builders, again, right, the most options possible. And for some builders, right, they don't really have a choice but to launch their own private chain. So one of the examples is, when we're working with governments, they want control over who may access the data, who can validate for the network, and ultimately who can actually deploy contracts on the network. So one example, it was just announced yesterday, was with a project called Balcony. They are working with Bergen County as well as a number of other municipals and counties in New Jersey here in the U.S. To tokenize land, real estate deeds, essentially land records. And as when you make a real estate transaction, those deeds change hand to hand, right? And you really don't want a permissionless marketplace, let's say, for these deeds, right? Because they need to go through government sign-offs. There's probably some aspect of privacy that needs to be enabled, right? So that you don't see everyone who owns every property and their addresses and all that other PII. So I think what's the beauty of Avalanche is that it's a network that scales horizontally. A lot of chains these days, you'll see them advertising 100K TPS or like, oh, we can support 1 billion users, right? But if they're building on an EVM environment, or if anything similar, right? Those claims are, I would say, mostly marketing claims at this point in time. Whereas we've taken an approach where, and I think like for what it's worth, like the Cosmos ecosystem, Polkadot ecosystem came before us, but also nowadays like the ETH ecosystem, with L2s, right? They're taking a very similar approach where they're deploying more chains, allowing for more block space, and then each chain can be customized to the builder's needs.
I see. Thanks a lot for this first overview. So in essence, we can have, when you launch your L1 on Avalanche, you can have your specific VM, virtual machine, so customized for your needs. You can have KYC, specific whitelist, specific permissioned environment that is probably very aligned with certain needs of real-world assets, probably, or as you say, institutions, government, that want to have more a walled garden in a way, so they cannot leave everything open, and we'll see what happens, right? Very, very cool. And in addition to that, I think that Avalanche has been working very, very hard in order to make also this launch of new L1 simpler. I think one of the supporting, let's say, technologies, maybe AvaClouds, and many other things to create, to simplify the deployment of these additional L1. Do you want to tell something more about it?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a couple programs active for L1 builders. At the very top, there's just general BD grants investments that we've done over the last 5 years to track any type of builder, right? But it has to make sense. Like if someone could deploy on the C chain and they don't have any like specific requirements as to why they need their own chain, we're never going to push them. It's going to be like, hey, we'll meet the builder where they're at. So from our perspective, we have general BD grants and investments. And those are for builders that come to us with bold ideas, want to be ambitious, they need funding to get started. That's where it kind of slots in. But then if you're a builder that wants to build your own L1, we have a specific program called Retro 9000. That's a retroactive grants program. It's a bit similar to Arbitrum's retroactive grants program, but this one is specifically for builders that want to deploy their own chain on Avalanche. And the way this program works is, once they deploy to testnet, that's when they get on a public leaderboard. And based on their progress to mainnet, we'll be tracking that leaderboard. The community can vote. Ultimately, it's up to the discretion of the foundation board to reward on who to reward these grants to and how much. And then once the chains go on mainnet, that's when these grants are rewarded. I believe our first cohort is going out now, and then those cohorts will be rewarded on a quarterly basis. And then the second program we have is, this one's less advertised, but it's called Avalanche Builder Credits. So you alluded to AvaCloud. AvaCloud was born almost out of necessity to get the tech stack up and running. And what AvaCloud does is they're a blockchain as a service company. So within Avalabs. And basically, if you're an L1 builder, let's say you're a non-technical founder, AvaCloud can handle the full chain deployment for you. We've done this, and in certain cases also, like when we work with banks, for instance, they don't really want to touch the infrastructure and prefer to outsource. So what AvaCloud currently has, I think, around 70 or 80 plus clients, maybe close to 100 now. Wow. And a lot of them are like of the enterprise, institutional variety. Like the use case I just mentioned, right? Balcony, they're an AvaCloud client, and they're able to handle pretty much everything, top down, right? From an infrastructure perspective. Let's say you want to pick and choose, right? Let's say you want to build the chain yourself, but then maybe not run the validator nodes. AvaCloud can also do that. They have a pretty handy like DevNet site where you can actually launch your own chain in like under 10 minutes. So it's that simple. And then in addition to AvaCloud, starting last year, we started working with other blockchain as a service companies. Traditionally, they've been roll-up as a service companies, a lot of them, because they've only deployed L2s. So for a lot of them, Avalanche L1s were the first like foray into deploying L1 fully autonomous L1 blockchains. So right now on the docket, we have Zeev, we have Gelato. There's a more native team called Ash. And they're all, and what the builders credits do is they basically provide subsidies so that so that pricing should never really be a constraint, right? For a customer of theirs to sign on with Gelato versus AvaCloud or vice versa. So it's a lot of it is based on which team they're comfortable working with. Let's say maybe you've used Gelato automation or account abstraction in the past. You want to also use their tech stack to build your own blockchain. Now you have the option to do so. So we try to meet builders where they're at. Try to give them as many options as possible. And now they have 4 options, and there's more in the pipeline to choose from now with regards to who to partner with.
That's fantastic. What about? There is a myth that is circulating in the Web3 world that launching an L1 on Avalanche is ultra expensive, but how expensive it is? Is it so expensive as many people say, or is it just, a classical fad in the Web3 world? Yeah,
I would say it depends on what you want to compare it to, right? It definitely has more overhead costs than if you want to launch an application or a dApp on a public blockchain. There's a couple of different infrastructure costs to be aware of. You're going to need your own validator node infrastructure, RPCs. Probably sign up with one of the many providers nowadays for explorers. You probably want, if you're an institutional chain, you probably want some sort of custody solution attached to it, right? Maybe exchange listings. So I would say if you compare it to launching your own dApp, yes, it is more expensive. You'll have to, think through the pros and cons there, right? If you compare it to launching a chain on, let's say, Cosmos or L2s, a lot of the costs are pretty, I would say, are pretty similar. On Avalanche, you do also get the benefit of interoperability between chains. We've built a native interoperability solution called ICM, or interchain messaging. It's very similar to IBC, a bit of a different mechanism in the back end. But that also alleviates some of the costs. Like, for example, if you're doing an exchange listing, right, you can have that token also exist on the C chain, which most major exchanges already connect to. So they don't have to do a custom integration with their L1. So in terms of like actual costs, like I've seen L1s launch, as low as 20 to 30K a year in costs. And then I've also seen like L1s be, half a mil plus, right, to run. So it just depends on, I think it ultimately comes down to like what kind of bells and whistles you want. If you want, like, let's say Etherscan support day one, and you want BitGo custody, Fireblocks, right? That's definitely going to cost you, more than if we were to deploy a chain that didn't need a lot of these features.
Yeah. Well, it seems that this architecture is, one of the fantastic, technology for real world assets, right? And I think that also Avalanche somehow it's working and it's moving strongly in that direction. Of course, there is competition because, well, real world assets, it's kind of a big deal finally, right? So I think there are several blockchain like Plume with Red Belly and several others are also betting on it. But how Avalanche is differentiating itself from the competition? So what are the advantages of using Avalanche in the world of real world assets?
Yeah, so I would say there's a few layers to this, right? On the technical side, I think we covered a lot of it.
Yes.
As a builder, you have the optionality to launch on the C chain, which I think a lot of institutions are really thinking about, right? Launching on public permissionless blockchains, especially if they're just tokenizing assets. A lot of them, what they'll do is they'll permission at a different level. So sometimes at the application level, or at the wallet level, like within Securitize's platform, for instance. Or they'll opt to launch their own L1 chain. And in the past, we've done pilots with JP Morgan, Citi, Apollo, and those have all been custom Avalanche L1s. And then from a BD perspective, from the very beginning, the mission of Ava Labs was to tokenize the world's assets. You can see this clearly in the DNA of our team. A lot of us come from Wall Street or traditional finance, consulting, and we understand the needs of these types of clients. From our perspective, a lot of it does become a BD endeavor at the end of the day. I think the tech gets you. The tech is really just table stakes, right? Getting you essentially a seat at the table. If it's not good, then I think you got bigger problems. But then from a BD perspective, really be able to understand the client's needs or the partner's needs, and providing them all the resources they need, right, to get going. I think that's a big component. Here in Avalanche, we're quite bullish on real world assets and have seen the trend accelerate, obviously, over the course of the last year with the new administration here in the U.S. And we believe that trend will continue to continue to accelerate. I always joke with Morgan, who's our head of institutions and capital markets, that sometimes her deals it's completely flipped. Like back a year or two ago, right? The DeFi projects would move extremely quick, and institutions would always kind of take a wait and see approach. But nowadays institutions are just jumping right in, whereas DeFi protocols and in contrast sometimes have slowed down a little bit. And a lot of times it's because they're trying to figure out how to get involved on the institutional side. So it's definitely you can see that paradigm shift very clearly, and I think and to my point earlier, right, I think it'll continue to be that way.
I completely agree with you. I mean, it's just something is a trend that is inevitable at this point. So TradFi and DeFi are converging, and there is nothing we can do that we like it or not, but it's happening. And I think this whole discussion about TradFi and DeFi, it will become obsolete, in the future. Like probably in one generation, they will just say, "What is TradFi, DeFi? What do you mean with it, right?" But for us that we have been here when there was no DeFi, I think. And now that these two worlds are converging, we're still, having these compartments in our mind. We're starting to see how these things are playing together. Mm-hmm. But it's fascinating, at least. Going forward in this direction, I see that Avalanche also launched two evergreen testnet. I think one is called Intain and one is called Spruce, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing them correctly, but these two testnet are specifically for experimentation of institutions in the area of real-world assets. Am I reading this correctly? Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think so. Evergreen L1s are, I would say, like more of a umbrella term for any sort of institutional L1. Intain, actually, there's going to be news coming out for Intain, so I won't spoil it here. But Spruce was our very first attempt at that, and it was meant to be almost like a playground of sorts, right? A test bed for any institution that wants to come on, but can't do so in a mainnet capacity. Nowadays, I would say there's quite a few institutional L1s that have gone through trials and testnet phase, and then graduated to mainnet. And some of them are with banks, like I mentioned earlier, right? We've done trials with the MAS, with JP Morgan, Citi, Apollo, etc. And then some are with government entities. So in the early days, we did a project with Deloitte for FEMA. More recently, we did Balcony with the state of New Jersey. And then I believe like 2 years ago, we also announced a project with California DMV. So these are all meant to be, their permission L1 chains. Now, I think we're seeing a bit of a paradigm shift. If institutions are just, doing tokenization efforts, right? These days, we see that more and more on public permission blockchains. And it's, like I said, right, we try to make sure that our partners are comfortable with whatever deployment it is. So if they want to tokenize on the C chain, by all means, right?
Why not?
We've already done a bunch. Like on the money market fund side, we've partnered with BlackRock, Securitized for BUIDL. We most recently announced VanEck VBill on Avalanche.
Wow.
And then on the private credit side, we also have Apollo's A-Cred fund. So these days, I think you're seeing a lot more flavors, but the option is always there, right? If you want to launch a permissioned, institutional L1, an evergreen L1, if you will, you always have that option.
Fantastic. And Intain is more for tokenization of assets, right?
Yeah. So they're actually doing some interesting things. Right now, so they've had a few pivots. So I think they started off with like asset-backed securities, but now I think there's gonna be some news coming out, so I won't spoil it.
All right, we'll stay tuned then. Okay, very interesting. Yes, I remember also there was also collaboration with Wisdom 3, if I remember correctly, in your pipeline. I mean, incredible, anyway, partners directly from TradFi that are already experimenting with Avalanche L1. About going forward still in this direction of the Avalanche L1, I mean, one of them that for us is one of the most interesting, right? Because we breathe and live DeFi here at HyperNest is Dexalot, right? That they have, I think it's a club, if I remember correctly. And they're doing quite great so far. How did they decided to launch their own L1? And I mean, have you been working together with them? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about them? We are really excited about Dexalot.
Yeah, we've been working with Dexalot for years now. I think so. They first started off on the C chain, And this is what I meant, right? Like they use the C chain for the initial contract deployments, but that was never like the end vision. Because as a central limit order book, you do need like specific customizations to the EVM,
Yep.
so that the market maker integrations are smooth, so that you're able to see the throughput you need, right? But also able to control the cost per transaction. So with Dexalot, their North Star has always been to have their own custom L1. And once the technology got good, I think they were like the second or third subnet at the time deployed. And then we obviously changed that branding. So they're one of our top L1s, Avalanche L1s now. And the chain is a spot, right now it's a spot central limit order book, DEX. It's one of the very few that have scaled to where they are. Dexalot does anywhere from $1 billion to $3 to $4 billion in trading volume per month. And this is all spot, right? Like no leverage, just people trading tokens. Most of the tokens listed are major pairs. So things like Bitcoin, ETH, AVAX. But then you also have like some other tokens, right? Like meme coins from time to time. And what's interesting is with Dexalot, you can either bridge funds to their chain and trade on there directly. And the trading experience is very similar to a centralized exchange in that, in like a Binance or Coinbase, right? In terms of the user experience. But it's all done on chain. There's a pretty I think still pretty small validator set, but it is decentralized to an extent, right? At least more so than most exchanges. And then if you don't want to bridge to Dexalot chain, they've also enabled a tool called Simple Swap, which I believe is active on, I want to say Avalanche, Arbitrum, and I think one or two more chains where you can swap, you can actually access it through the C chain, for instance, and then the orders get routed to Dexalot on the back end. So I think Dexalot is one of those chains where they've found proven product market fit. I think trading's honestly been one of those use cases, right? That will always stick around in crypto. And then I do like how they also start off with spot. That's honestly the harder problem to tackle. I mean, spot versus perps at least. You see other chains, right, like Hyperliquid, start with perps first and then expand to spot, right? But if you look at Binance, if you look at Coinbase, all the top exchanges, most of the revenues comes from spot trading. So I would say, we're obviously very, very keen on helping Dexalot and their journey here. And, hopefully we'll see more product offerings from them pretty soon.
That's super exciting. I also really love this idea of, if I want to have an advanced trading experience, I will go to Avalanche L1, but if I just want to have a simple swap, I can do it directly from the C chain, to simplify things, and probably then they will use your internal messaging system that is highly optimized, and therefore probably the experience is still very, very user-oriented. It sounds a little bit like DYDX, of course. I mean, the comparison, it's obvious. But do you see other possible, let's say, DeFi or also not DeFi dApps on the C chain that somehow are planning to launch their L1?
Yeah, of course. So I would say for dApps that are looking to, let's say, graduate to their L1s, most do so because of performance-related constraints. So let's say they started off with 10,000 users, and then all of a sudden, right, they have like 5 million users, all trading at the same time. At that point, we'll always have the discussion with the team, right, saying, hey, like, at this point, maybe you guys should consider owning your own block space and being able to customize the chain to fit your specific needs for your users. If a chain doesn't have that critical mass, it's very tough, right? Because even with ICM, there's still a bit of friction getting to your own L1, getting users to your own L1. There's a migration process usually, and users might not want to connect to a different RPC, right, and within their wallet. So we always work with projects to think through that decision very carefully. But like I said, right, like we always, I think the default for most builders is to build on the C chain first, and then once they hit a certain critical mass, or if they just need certain features, right, like Dexalot needed high throughput, maybe some customization to the EVM, then at that point, we'll point them in the right direction.
Okay, when they launch their L1, of course they can also decide clearly their gas, right? If they can use their native token as gas, probably.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things you can do. You can use your native token as gas. You're not beholden to using AVAX as gas anymore, right? That's something that's not quite possible on L2s, for instance. You can also have your own custom staking token, especially if you're a permissionless L1, where you specify, hey, let's say I want my users to stake, 1,000 ABC coins, right, per validator node. You're able to do that as well, and you can forego the AVAX staking requirement altogether. Another thing that's I think interesting is you have an option to launch your token natively on the L1 or on the C chain. I don't think this is like really discussed, because like you have to like really kind of dive deep to like understand what the implications are. But if a token's minted on the C chain, right, then that supply will always be native to the C chain, and you can still bridge it over to the L1, right? Sometimes exchanges, custody providers, they tend to like that because, like I said, right, they're already connected to the C chain. But if you're a big enough L1, like a good example of that is MapleStory. MapleStory Universe. That's a game that launched on Avalanche 3 weeks ago at this point. Their main token NXPC, exchanges, some exchanges integrate that directly to their L1. So when you like for example withdraw from the exchange, right, it arrives on their L1 instead of the C chain, and then some exchanges they opted for the, I would say, slightly easier route of connecting to the bridge version on the C chain. So I think it just depends. But there's a bunch of, I think there's a lot of design decisions you can make when it comes to L1. That's the whole point of this architecture.
Absolutely. Okay, and here we enter a little bit in a spicy territory. So the debate between Ethereum mainnet and of course the L2 parasitic, not parasitic, right? How these L2 are adding value to the L1, or they're actually sucking liquidity from it. So how do you see this parallelism with Avalanche? So how in the end the L1 are creating value for the Avalanche ecosystem more interestingly, or more focusingly on the token per se? Alex.
Yeah, we thought about this quite a bit. So back in the day, right, when when L1s were still called subnets, the main value accrual was almost a condition that subnets needed to, each validator of the subnet needed to also be a validator on the primary network. So what that means is you needed to stake at least 2,000 AVAX per node to basically run your own subnet. That was, and the idea there is that as more subnets got spun up, right, and they each have their set of validator nodes, that AVAX as a network token would be locked up, and that would essentially accrue value for the network token. I think that created a few problems. One, it was almost cost prohibitive, right, for new builders. For new L1s, we always even if you're permission, we always recommend at least 8 to 10 validator nodes. Let's say you have 10 validator nodes, right? Do the math. That's 20K AVAX. Right now, it's AVAX price is at $20. That's 400K, right? Just to get up and running and run your own valid, and just to stake to those validator nodes. And not to mention the validator node infra, all the cloud computing costs do add up as well. So we moved to with the Edna upgrade recently, we moved to a pay-as-you-go model where you're able to have a choice, right? You can still stake the 2,000 AVAX per node. Let's say you're no AVAX whale or OG, you just have a bunch of AVAX lying around. You can still do that. But if you don't want to do that, let's say you don't want to hold AVAX, or maybe you can't hold AVAX, right? In the instance of certain institutions, then you can opt for the pay-as-you-go model. And how that works is you can specify any staking token. So it doesn't have to be AVAX anymore. It could be just ABC token, right?
Mhm.
And you don't have to stake AVAX as a
Also
secondary
your
token.
token, right? Also your own
Yep.
token, potentially, right?
Yep, your own token, or you can use someone else's token, or you can use like, I don't know,
Mhm.
like a lot token from Dexalot if you
Yeah.
wanted to. Let's say you have alignment there. And then each month on a validated node basis, you pay a certain amount of AVAX to the network, and that gets burnt. If you don't pay the AVAX to the network, or if you don't like have the AVAX staked, right, you don't fulfill one of those two requirements, that validator node would no longer be operational. So right now, I think the fee is a little over 1 AVAX per month per node. So essentially, what that resulted in is instead of the original 2,000 AVAX being staked, right, as almost like a capex cost to get up and running up front, you are paying an ongoing OpEx cost. I think it gives builders a lot more flexibility.
Yep.
Instead of having to stake 20,000 AVAX right off the bat, right? To
Yeah.
start, you're paying like, 15 AVAX a month between all your validator nodes. So it's and over time, right? The fee is dynamic, so that it could fluctuate over time. Let's say the network ends up getting 10,000, 20,000 validator nodes, right? Then we could also increase the fee per node to get it down to some sort of ideal sweet spot. But we definitely won't do that until we see more adoption for L1s.
I see. And just for me to understand this point, and the AVAX are directly burned, therefore the value accrue to everyone holding AVAX to the whole ecosystem equally, basically.
That's right. The
Okay.
AVAX is directly burned.
All right. Very, very cool. Fantastic. Okay, we touched briefly on Cosmos, but I would like to know from your perspective, right? What are the advantages of launching an Avalanche L1 if we compare it with launching an app chain on Cosmos, or launching your own L2, or launching an L3 on top of an L2? There are a lot of flavors now potentially possible in this Web3 world. Why, as a builder, I should prefer an Avalanche L1?
Yeah, so I think the three main options, right, these days for builders, apart from Avalanche L1s, are launching an app chain on Cosmos, launching your own L1, right, without leveraging any tech stack,
Yes.
and launching an L2 on Ethereum. So I'll take each of those kind of separately, and then we can summarize. But
Yeah.
so with regards to Cosmos, I think to be fair, like we took some inspiration from how Cosmos did their interop, right? So
Why
you have
not?
IBC, similar to ICM, but each of the chains, I would say, is their ecosystem with regards to each chain is pretty federated. So there's no like one BD team or infrastructure ecosystem fund you can reach out to get started, right? And the feedback from a lot of builders was it's hard to get going, because essentially what ends up happening is that while all the chains are interconnected, it's difficult to actually compete, right? When you're competing with all these other chains. And then what's ended up happening is that essentially every app ends up becoming its own chain, which is an interesting phenomena to witness, but at the same time, right, it doesn't bring together like a coherent ecosystem. And not to mention, Cosmos out of the gate wasn't EVM compatible, so that also gave pause, right, to a lot of EVM Ethereum OG developers. If you want to build your own chain, not leveraging any tech stack, that obviously comes with a lot of overhead costs, right, that you have to solve for. And I want to say, like, these days, like, most chains are, most new chains, they're raising tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Debatable whether you actually need that much, but I would argue like to get going, you probably need 50 to 100 mil at the very least. That's to jump. That's to hire a team. That's to get the technical development out of the way, get all the initial like integrations right, whether it's exchanges, custody providers, all the stuff that we did in the early days of Avalanche. And so if you launch on the Avalanche stack, especially with ICM, right, you won't have to worry about a lot of that. Like from a ecosystem perspective, we always keep that in mind, right, when we're talking to service provider, infrastructure partners, that sort of thing. And then in addition, right, we provide a lot more support outside of that. So it's almost like you're joining an ecosystem versus trying to chart your own, right? And then with regards to L2s, I think this is actually the most interesting one because L2s have proliferated over the past couple of years. And so almost like a pendulum, right? Like back in like 2021, 22, like everyone wanted their own L1, whether it's on Cosmos, Polkadot, their own L1, right? Their own chain. And then sometime in, I was to 23 to 24, we started seeing like a proliferation of all these L2s, right? All the exchanges started launching their L2s, and some L1s converted to the L2s, right? I want to say a lot of it was done for ETH alignment. Not only are you EVM compatible right out of the box, but you also have, I would say, the broader support of the Ethereum ecosystem, right? And I think you're starting to see a bit of shift in tone these days. A lot of the chains that have launched over the past year or two and have done well, right? By some definition of that word, have been L1s. So I think the biggest example of that by far is Hyperliquid. Some people like
Sui.
What's that?
Also Sui.
Yeah, all the Move L1s, right? Sui, Aptos, even Movement, I would consider that in that category. You got some like Barachain, for instance, right? That's building on the Cosmos stack. And then coming up, you have Monad. You have So I think the pendulum, always swings, right? Depending on what their narratives are. I respect builders a lot if they've stuck to the original vision, right? Like the Sui team, for instance, the Monad team. They've always wanted to build an L1 and wanted to own their own, infrastructure stack. But anyways, I digress a little bit. So with regards to L2s, I think the biggest issue is always being beholden to the host chain, which is Ethereum mainnet. And I think there's a few things, a few characteristics that have come up, right, with L2s that most people criticize these days. One is around, there's a big discussion on Twitter right now around like, should the sequencer be decentralized, right? What benefits does that bring? In terms of censorship resistance, in terms of immutability, that sort of thing, right? So I think with regards to that, my view is always like, if you have one centralized party, controlling a key part of your tech stack, whether it's extractive or not, I think that's straying away from the ethos of crypto, at a very base level, right?
Yeah.
And then I think the other main critique these days has been around interoperability. You have all these L2s, some are part of the OP stack, some are part of Arbitrum Orbit or Arbitrum L3s, right? And each kind of ecosystem wants its own interoperability standard to be the default. So I think this is still an ongoing debate, and we'll have to see like where it settles. But my gut reaction is there's going to be a few L2s that stand head and shoulders above the rest. You're already starting to see that, kind of with base.
It's already happening,
Yeah. And then, an Avalanche, I think the main benefit is, you get one cohesive ecosystem where all the chains are interoperable with each other. You can set custom rules, whether you want that or not even, right? You have the full support of the Avalanche Foundation as well as the AvaLabs team to help you get going. And then you also obviously, there's a lot of benefit on the cost side, right? Like I said, to get a chain up and running, it's like 10, 20K a year at the lowest level, and then you can add more on top of that.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's look now a little bit into the future. Right. So how do you see the evolution of DeFi real-world assets on Avalanche in the next maybe 12 to 24 months?
Yeah. So the tokenization effort really kicked off, I want to say like sometime in the last year or so. Every fund out there started basically with money market funds or tokenized T-bills. You have BlackRock's BIDO, Franklin Templeton's Benji, you have Wisdom Tree's funds, you have Van Eck's most recent V-bill. So, and then you have all these stable coins that are essentially like wrappers for these assets, right? And I think that was a good place to start. It's basically the risk-free yield of the world when it comes to dollars. But now we're seeing projects moving further and further down the risk curve. You're seeing a lot of private credit. You're seeing a lot of, tokenized bonds, whether they be corporate bonds, municipal bonds, bonds of various governments around the world. You're seeing tokenized equities spring up. So Kraken had a big announcement with Backed just the other day, and then we know of quite a few other players also working on this. There's one on Avalanche called Denari that's actually building their own Avalanche L1 as well to tokenize equities. And then I think you're gonna see other things, right? More esoteric assets, real estate, luxury goods. And on Avalanche, we don't discriminate. As long as something is valuable, has demand, and has uncorrelated yields to crypto, and good yields, right, at that, we're open to bringing them on chain. Now, I think there's a second part to your question where around the DeFi integration for these assets. That's actually one of the problems us on the DeFi team we're trying to solve right now with a lot of these partners, because it's one aspect to tokenize it, bring it on chain, right? But I think with a lot of these assets, if you just do that, there's actually very little benefit in tokenization. The issuer might realize some operational efficiencies, right, and whatnot. But to the average user, it just adds more friction actually to access some of these assets. I speak from by the way, I just not to digress, but I speak from the point of view of someone living in the U.S. I obviously have a brokerage account with Robinhood, Fidelity, right? I can buy these money market funds pretty easily. But maybe it's a different perspective, right, from someone living in a third world country where they don't have these resources. So I'll caveat by saying that. But for someone like me and you, right, if you can buy these assets in a typical brokerage, there's very little benefit to actually connecting a MetaMask and then going through all the steps, right, to buying the tokenized version. That's essentially the same thing. So I think the DeFi. Sorry, what was that?
Apart from self-custody, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's self-custody, but it's permission, right? A lot of these. So it's not, I guess, not really self-custody. But anyways,
someone is still holding it for you, somehow.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a using wallet versus the Robinhood app, right?
Yeah.
So I think the DeFi integrations are especially important because it gives these assets more utility, right, than you otherwise wouldn't have. I think one of my actually favorite examples is we did an integration for SBIDO, which is the wrap version of BIDO on Euler.
Yep.
And you're able to, SBIDO as an asset is permissioned, so only holders of BIDO, right, are able to access that through Securitize. But then you can use that within Euler and borrow against that, access the permissionless liquidity on Euler. So in a traditional prime brokerage account, your counterparty would be the brokerage firm. But here, your counterparty that you're borrowing from, right, are permissionless users within DeFi. We'll see a lot more of these integrations, I would say, down the road. But it's not an easy problem to solve because, they all require, very specific like Oracle feeds. A lot of times they require some sort of permission at some level, right? And there's a point where you have to say, hey, we're okay with some aspect of this being permissioned. So the problem is on a technical level, but also on very much on the regulatory level.
Yeah, I see. And we're also super excited to see this integration, like also Apollo working together with Morpho, for looping, private credits was another interesting thing. So we personally believe that this will actually unlock a new level of evolution and innovation in TradFi, also using, tokenized assets now that become a little bit more the bread and butter of this economy, let's say, on-chain economy. All right, we are getting closer to the end, but before we close, I would like to ask you, what's the best way to get in touch with Avalanche? So for our listeners, from our audience, so if they want to get in touch with Avalanche, if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to build on Avalanche, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so we make ourselves pretty available. I think most of us are on Twitter. My handle is EXK200 on Twitter. And then if you just wanted to reach out, right, you can go on at AVAX on Twitter. So that's usually the best spot. We also have Discord, Telegram, so you can drop all the handles in the info.
Fantastic. It has been super great talking to you, Eric. Very exciting to learn more about Avalanche and the future of this ecosystem. And well, looking forward to see how this TradFi, DeFi world converge in the next future.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.